the blazing desert, Terran Blithe awakens wounded yet hungry for life. The mysterious figure of Soren Hale rescues her from unseen enemies, but as the legendary Maddox legacy is revealed, power and love will drag them into a deadly vortex. Are you ready to step in? Under the scorching sun, the desert stretched like an invisible net of fire to the horizon, the fine sand blazing hot, reflecting each speck of dust like millions of shattered glass fragments. Amid the searing sea of sand, Terran Blithe lay motionless, her wrists still bearing red marks from the plastic ties that had nearly cut into her skin, her back pressed against the spiny base of a thorny cactus. The parched air clung to her skin, each breath she took laden with burning sunlight, as if swallowing embers. Her eyes were heavy, her lips cracked like the fissured earth, and she had abandoned any hope of calling for help hours ago. Terran's vision blurred with shimmering heat waves, blending the fiery red of the sky and stone. She recalled the cold glow of office lights, the scent of paper and the rich taste of coffee at her desk, now replaced by the gritty taste of sand mixed with her dry saliva. Teetering on the edge of consciousness, she heard the uneven clatter of hooves crushing gravel, resounding like a warning from another world. The sound grew clearer, and the tiled roof of a tent emerged like a promise of salvation. A figure flickered through the heat haze, tall and steady atop a worn leather saddle. The sun hung overhead, casting a glow on the tattered brim of a hat. As the figure dismounted, the horse's dry snort rang like a drumbeat heralding life. Soren Hale stepped down, his stance as solid as a silent rock against the wind. His eyes met Terran's for a moment, his gaze neither hurried nor dismissive, but calm, holding the vastness of the desert itself. "I don't think you're someone they meant to leave behind." His voice was low, smooth like the wind slipping through rocky crevices. Terran tried to respond, her lips parting, but only a hoarse rasp escaped. She felt the wound on her temple, the faint trail of dried blood along her hairline, and he leaned closer, his gaze both observant and respectful. His hands gently traced the plastic ties, drawing a knife from his side, its blade flashing with a sharp glint. The knife moved like a cautious dance, slicing through the plastic shackles, freeing her weary wrists. As her arms fell limp, Terran felt a searing pain tear through her flesh, a reminder that she was still alive, still had a chance. Soren didn't rush to comfort or soothe, only gently supported her, guiding her steps to the saddle. Like a fragile object swaying in the balance, she was lifted to a new height, her heart pounding as if it might burst from her chest. The wind whistled in her ears, sand swirled around the horse's hooves, and she clung tightly to the saddle horn as if grasping for life itself. The journey back was not long, but each second under the relentless sun felt like being burned to ash. The scent of sweat and the embark on a journey of survival and redemption in the merciless expanse of the desert. Terran Blithe, battered and abandoned, clings to life amidst the dunes, her hope dwindling like the last drops of water in a canteen. Enters Soren Hale, a solitary rider whose quiet strength and unyielding resolve become her lifeline. As the sun blazes and the sands shift, their paths converge in a tale of resilience, trust, and the faint pulse of hope that refuses to fade. This is no mere rescue. It's a reckoning with the raw, untamed heart of human endurance. In the quiet stillness of the canvas tent, Terran Blithe opened her eyes softly, like morning petals, as faint rays of light slipped through the wrinkled tarp, casting ethereal streaks across the earthen floor. The air inside was damp, like the desert's breath after a rare rain. The scent of wet wood and lingering smoke wove a gentle blanket around her. The cool cloth on her forehead radiated a mist-like chill, wrapping her like night dew. Tiny droplets seeped into her skin, reminding her she was alive, no longer abandoned in the parched sea of sand. The bandages on her wrists ached like torn silk, yet they carried the first sense of safety after days of despair. Soren Hale sat silently nearby, his back etched with scars like a map of his life, not just marks of violence, but testaments to battles endured. He offered a faint smile, asking no questions, making no remarks. His hands deftly sharpened a knife, the steel emitting a soft rasp like a swift stream over rocks, each motion deliberate and precise. The silence was broken only by the wind slipping through the tent's seams and the sizzle of boiling water, a simple symphony crafting a rare haven in the vast desert. Terran tried to sit up, her chin trembling. She reached for the bowl of water he'd scooped, feeling its warmth quiver like the heart of a stranger full of resolve. She sipped, slowly, pouring life back into her withered body. Soren said nothing, only nodded faintly when she paused, as if to say, "Keep going, you'll be fine." No lengthy words were needed. Each nod carried an ocean of reassurance. Around them, the crumpled canvas walls swayed under the heat. Outside, the desert pulsed with waves of shimmering air, as if testing Terran's will to survive with every passing minute. She stood, moving slowly, her eyes following Soren as he set the sharpened knife aside and wiped sweat from his brow with a damp, rough cloth. Every gesture was concise, no movement wasted, yet brimming with unshakable calm, a strength that needed no boast. When Soren stepped outside to gather firewood, Terran lingered, lifting the thick blanket and catching the thick blanket and catching the faint scent of smoke. In that moment, she realized his silence wasn't indifference, but a way to keep her shattered peace. She bent to pick up a rad-gnawed coffee pot in the tent's corner, handing it to him when he returned, her knees slightly bent, but her eyes bright as a morning star. He took the pot, nodding. "You know how to make coffee, don't you?" His voice carried softly through the canvas. Terran gave a half-smile. "My mom made it every morning when I was a kid." Soren's eyes flickered with a fleeting warmth before settling back to calm. His hands turned the coffee pot like a sculptor carving warmth. Steam rose, curling around them, painting a scene of harmony between desert and tent. When the coffee was ready, Soren tossed a small piece of wood into the fire, the flames licking the dry logs. Terran stepped forward to help, gripping a peeling branch tightly. He raised an eyebrow, wordless but clear. "Let yourself rest." In that moment, she glimpsed the softness hidden behind his stoic facade, a fleeting warmth in a barren world. The tent grew warmer than ever, not just from the flickering fire, but from the unspoken bond between two strangers. In the silence, Terran Blithe understood that sometimes the most precious thing isn't words of comfort, but a steadfast presence, assuring her she was sheltered. And in Soren Hale's reserved gestures, she sensed a quiet resilience, the start of a wordless partnership, rooted in trust. Under the pale light of the desert morning, Terran Blithe quietly stepped to the edge of the tent, fine dust clinging to her sleeves like remnants of a night yet to fade. The wind slipped through the canvas seams, carrying the scent of dying embers and the sharp tang of cactus, tracing faint curves in the air. She took a deep breath, tasting the metallic edge of the canteen on the wooden shelf, then turned to Soren Hale, who sat by an old crate, his eyes fixed on a bundle of herbs he'd just gathered. The soft scrape of his knife against a piece of bark rang like a bell, stirring her heart. Finally, she blurted out, Who are you?" Her soft words carried the weight of last night's tension, mingling with her quickened breath. Soren looked up, his dark eyes flickering with a vague spark, and replied with a single phrase, "Soren Hale." The name echoed in the stillness like a whisper of the wind, brief, yet brimming with untold stories. The air in the tent grew thick, like a thin fog clinging to Terran's mind, stinging her eyes. She left her seat, stepping toward a cracked mirror hanging crookedly on the canvas wall. In its shattered surface, her reflection wavered. A sun-darkened face with weary eyes, a far cry from the polished woman in office attire with neatly combed hair. Each crow's foot at her eyes, each wrinkle was a fissure carved by panic, telling the story of her journey from a cold office to this scorching valley of sand. She pressed her palm to the mirror, the cold grazing her skin as if the line between past and present could dissolve at any moment. Before she could dwell further, the sound of hoofs echoed outside the tent. Soren Hale was ready to depart. He bent down, lifting a leather satchel of herbs, then stretched in his dusty coat. His eyes flicked to her, a brief glance laced with quiet trust, as if saying, "I'll be back." Without another word, he nodded and stepped out. Terran felt a sudden void, as if the steady hand that had sheltered her through the night had vanished. Outside, the desert stretched endlessly under a pale blue sky, heat waves rippling like distant mountains. Soren secured the horse's straps, tucking a vial of herbal tonic neatly before grasping the reins and giving a gentle shake to urge the animal forward. The horse snorted, the saddle's bell jingling rhythmically, a steady cadence like a prelude to the journey ahead. Terran stood still, her eyes following his receding figure, her heart sinking in the boundless expanse. The tent fell unbearably silent, filled only with the flutter of canvas in the wind and the soft hum of shifting dunes. Terran called out, "Soren, will you be all right?" Her voice hung in the air, unanswered, leaving a heavy silence like a stone rolling across the wilderness. She turned back slowly, her gaze drifting over the scattered remnants. The broken mirror, the rusted coffee pot, the empty crate. They mirrored her, alone, yet forced to rise and find a path. In that solitary moment, Terran Blithe realized the journey ahead wasn't Soren Hale's alone. It was hers too. A trek from doubt to trust, from aimlessness to clarity. The vast desert could swallow the lost, but it could also sharpen the line between those who flee and those who face it. She lifted the canteen, took a sip, feeling the bitter tang spread through her throat, then exhaled. "I won't let silence consume me." As Soren's figure vanished behind a dune's curve, she knew the mystery remained veiled. But she was ready to step into that labyrinth, to uncover a man and a life without a name. The desert night sky erupted from stillness to chaos as two beams of headlights flared like predatory eyes from the base of the ridge, casting glimmers across the dunes under the moonlight. Terran Blithe jolted upright in the rocky clearing, her heart lurching as the growl of engines closed the distance, a sign that they had returned. In an instant, the image of Soren Hale cleaning his gun under the sagging awning sharpened into a protective spear. His figure rose against the dim yellow light, a moment that framed him as an unyielding warrior. The growl morphed into the screech of tires tearing through sand as three pickups roared into the canyon. Sand swirled in clouds, sweeping over stone ledges, glittering like a fractured sea of stars. Soren swiftly drew his pistol, its steel barrel flashing, and lunged to shield Terran. His body pivoted, catching her as she grabbed his shoulder, her feet faltering in the shifting sand. The first gunshot thundered, echoing off the canyon walls like underground lightning, dust billowing around them. Three attackers leapt from the trucks, fanning out, their flashlights piercing the night. The first approached Terran, gun raised, but Soren didn't hesitate. He charged, slamming the stranger to the ground. The crack of breaking bone cut through the silent night, and Soren twisted the man's arm, pinning him face up in the fine sand, his eyes cold as a blade. A second shot roared, sand stinging Terran's ears. She ducked low, her heart pounding like a hammer against her ribs. The second attacker took aim, but Soren was faster, his elbow strike sending the man staggering, his gun flying, its steel glinting in the air. Meanwhile, the third, crouched behind a distant boulder, pulled the trigger. The bullet streaked like lightning, a searing whistle, and Soren lurched backward, a low groan escaping as he hit the ground, clutching his left shoulder. Blood seeped through his fingers, staining his dust-covered shirt. For a moment the fight paused. Heavy footsteps retreated, fading into the night. Terran Blithe rushed to Soren's side, kneeling, her eyes a storm of fear and resolve. She pulled back his shirt, her trembling hands tracing the wound. The bullet had torn through muscle, blood trickling like a crimson stream across the dune. She gasped at the depth of the gash, dread clawing at her, but she didn't falter. Terran tore a strip of rough cloth from her headscarf, blood soaking it red, and pressed it firmly against the wound, the pressure radiating through her palms like gripping a merciless lash. Soren struggled, his voice hoarse. "Let go! but pain choked his words. She held fast, whispering, "You have to live. I won't let you die here." Her eyes blazed with unyielding fire, and in that moment, the desert was no longer solitary. Amidst the wild darkness, two hearts beat in shared defiance. As the pain ebbed, Soren hissed, then gritted his teeth, his gaze locking onto hers. Under the faint moonlight, sweat and blood glistened on his brow like jewels. He nodded faintly, entrusting her with absolute faith in her steady hands. The desert wind slipped through the canyon, carrying the faint, acrid scent of gunpowder, a reminder that their enemies could return. Terran pressed her lips tight, her eyes scanning the dark void, resolve hard as steel. "They won't destroy us." She brushed his tangled hair, sweat and blood streaking his face, then tightened the cloth bandage. In the chaos of moments before, this fleeting calm between them felt sacred. They had faced the night together, and no matter how harsh the desert, their bond would remain a guiding light. In the pale morning light of the desert, Terran Blithe knelt before the worn leather satchel Soren Hale had tossed onto a rock the day before, her hands trembling like brittle leaves in the wind. Her fingers traced the fragile stitching, gliding over grimy folds until they touched the smooth wooden surface of a small square box. His heart, it seemed, carefully hidden within. She pressed her nail to the lid, feeling the grain rise like waves of memory, then gently unlatched the rusted metal clasp. The box sprang open, revealing a sprawling map, its edges stained like ash-dusted nostalgia, marked with fervent red ink tracing paths through dunes and chasms, labeled with an M, the sign of a force that had buried his past. Beneath a yellowed linen cloth, faded Polaroid photos emerged, their curled edges like dried tears. A refined young man in a black suit standing between two stern figures, framed by a glass building reflecting the sun's harsh glare. Terran's heart tightened, her mind swirling like sunlight piercing the tense seams, sweat beading on her brow. She pulled out the final photo, its edges blurred, capturing a faint, trembling smile on the young man's lips. Not the rugged drifter, but the remnant of a youth born for power and boardrooms. She looked up, her gaze fluttering like a wild bird suddenly stilled, then turned to Soren as he quietly entered. His shadow etched the golden sand, his dust-covered coat bearing scars like silent glyphs. Who are you really?" Her voice rasped, but the sweat on her skin tasted of resolve. Soren shook his head silently, stepping toward the box, his eyes deep as an underground spring. He handed her a folded, stained scrap of paper, urging her to open it, and Terran read the slanted script on the fragile page. "You weren't born to chase wealth. You were born to protect what's fragile." His mother's words drifted down, like petals in the wind scattering on the sand, evoking a love that could stir even the barren desert. The map unfurled under the sunlight, its creases forming rugged ridges and dry riverbeds marked in red places where the name Maddox echoed like a whisper from a land of ambition. She leaned closer, inhaling the scent of ink and smoke, sensing his past buried in every line, every angle. Soren bent forward, his shoulders tilting against the wind as if breaking free from old chains, then met her gaze, his voice a mix of pride and unease. "I'm not just Soren Hale anymore." In that moment, the desert seemed to hush, leaving only their breaths mingling with the cracks of the dunes and the first rays of dawn. Terran clasped his hand, her heart vibrating like a string brushed by the wind, and whispered, "Are you Colton Maddox?" He nodded faintly, his eyes clouding like the final tick of an ancient clock, concealing a world of power and conflict. The wooden box closed with a soft click of its rusted latch, like the end of a secret chapter. Soren tucked it back into the satchel, his shoulders trembling as if bearing the pain of years, now the pain of truth laid bare. Terran stepped back, watching him stand in the vast desert, both a fugitive from a vast fortune and a man burdened by nameless pressures. She approached, gently touching the deep scar on his wrist where plastic ties had once cut. "I'm here," she said, her voice warm as the glow of embers after a night wind. Whoever you are, whatever this story's end, and in that boundless expanse, amid grains of sand rising like they were caught in the morning light, Terran Blithe and Soren Hale stood in silence, accepting that sometimes only by exposing wounds can one find the path to true freedom. Beneath the midday sun of Purito Springs, the dusty road swirled like a chasing specter. Terran Blithe stepped out of a retired cowboy's rickety truck, her face burning, as if roasted over an open flame, sweat glistening on her brow like shattered glass. She edged into the town's only diner, where the lingering scent of pancakes hung in the arid air and dust bunnies clung to the wooden rafters above the door. At the counter she ordered a black coffee, its bitterness like a vow of retribution at the edge of civilization, then turned to eavesdrop on the construction workers huddled over a map spread across a table, its green and red lines smudged like faded lipstick. They spoke of Madeira Holdings, a subsidiary of Maddox Corp, their voices crackling like wind through stone. Drilling starts next week. The rigs will scrape the land bald, and if the old man doesn't sue in time, there'll be no trace of the dispute. Their words fell like hail in the desert, pounding Terran's heart, her resolve surging like waves crashing ashore. As Huxley Page, Corbin Vale, and Maris Caldwell shifted their blueprints toward the sunlight streaming through the window, Terran didn't hesitate. She approached, her gaze sharp as a razor slicing through their bravado. "Who's funding this project?" she asked curtly, her voice like smoke curling from a clay pipe. Maris Caldwell raised a hand, her expression tinged with skepticism, then answered, "Madeira Holdings, ma'am." The wind from the window lifted the paper, spiraling scraps across the room, as if summoning a rebellion. Terran studied the pipeline schematics, well locations, and laser-surveyed points, each a gash in the heart of the pristine wilderness. Without another word, she strode out, leaving Huxley and Corbin's stunned gazes behind. Her footsteps pressed into the ashen sand of the quiet path, past the abandoned post office and long-shuttered general store. In her chest, vague fears solidified into action. If Madeira completed the drilling, these ridges and prairies would become a concrete city of toxic gas and noise. Terran snapped a dry cactus spine, tears mingling with sand and dried blood, then smeared it across her forehead like a vow. On her way back to Soren Hale's tent, she stopped at the home of a white-bearded old man, a once notorious fisherman from distant seas, and traded a silver watch for an undocumented pickup truck. As the vehicle rolled forward, sand sprayed like war drums, and she sealed the windows, exhaling softly. "I'll stop them, even if it's just with wooden stakes and simple signs." At the edge of the drilling zone, Terran methodically drove wooden posts into the ground, wrapping them with wire bearing the words "protected area under review," redrawing the boundary of hope between the people and the corporation. Each hammer strike rang through the desert like a defiant anthem. At times, sweat and bits of dry bark flew, the relentless sun searing her shoulders, but her heart stayed cool, forged in steely resolve. As dusk dipped below the horizon, townsfolk who'd heard the news gathered, young men with hammers, an old woman with a rake, and children, sweaty but with eyes gleaming with determination. Terran stood among them, her hair whipping in the wind, her voice calm yet resolute. "If they dare start drilling, we'll sue, rally the press, and buy time for a temporary injunction." Her words were seeds sown in the earth, swiftly taking root. By night, on the hill's crest, the headlights of two unfamiliar pickups flashed in the valley, but the wooden barricades, signs, and dozens of silhouetted figures formed an unyielding human wall. Terran smiled, glancing toward the rock where she and Soren had once taken shelter, thinking of him tending his wounds. The wind whistled through the canyon like a whisper. "You've kept your promise." In that moment, she knew that in this land, no one was alone. The people's unity had drawn a new boundary, halting the advance of corporate greed. Under the faint dawn glow of the desert, the valley stirred as three sleek black pickups roared through the rocky ridge, their engines snarling like a storm about to break. Terran Blithe stood at the heart of the makeshift wooden barricade erected by the townsfolk the night before, the drilling map etched in her mind like an indelible scar. The crowd behind her pressed closer, gripping shovels and pickaxes, their eyes hardened like steel. As the headlights swept across, Soren Hale emerged from behind a massive boulder, pistol in hand, a silent guardian of the new dawn. No sirens blared, only a final rev of engines as the trucks charged the barricade. The crowd recoiled, wood splintering in all directions, but Terran stood firm. Her voice rose. "This is disputed land. Trespassers will be sued." Her words echoed across the sandy plain, the wind whipping fine dust into waves. For a moment the earth held its breath. Then the first crunch of tires on wood rang out like a war drum. Soren fired a burst of bright muzzle flashes, green fire glinting in the attacker's eyes. The first man stumbled, collapsing into the sand, his gun flying from his grip. But these weren't mere strangers. Huxley Page and Corbin Vale, two men in white shirts bearing the Madeira logo, leapt from the trucks, barking, "Orders are to clear this line." Sand swirled around their feet, summoning a whirlwind of chaos. As Soren lunged to intercept Huxley, their bodies collided, dust exploding in clouds. His pistol still aimed at the man's chest. A shot rang out, sharp and deafening. Terran caught a glimpse of Soren's left shoulder sparking with blood. Then he crumpled, his voice rasping. "Fall back." The gunfire reverberated through the canyon, tearing the desert's quiet sky. As he staggered, Terran threw herself forward, pressing her hands against his wound, blood gushing like a dry river surging back to life. The remaining attackers froze, stunned by her ferocity, perhaps not expecting this slight woman to face a hail of bullets. Maris Caldwell, the woman behind the wheel of the third truck, shouted a retreat. Engines roared, tires skidded, leaving long black streaks on the scorching sand. As the dust settled, Terran clung to Soren Hale in the desolate battlefield, her ears catching the faint throb of his heartbeat, a reminder of life's fragility. Amid the shaken landscape, the locals rushed forward. They lifted Soren onto a canvas blanket, his eyes half open but still burning with resolve. Terran shakily tore his headscarf, her trembling hands bandaging the bullet wound, sweat and blood splattering her shirt. The midday sun rose, its rays illuminating the deep crimson stains, but also highlighting the unwavering determination in Terran's eyes. She had held the line, her courage, and now the life of the man who had sheltered her through the harshest days. The desert wind howled, but this time, it didn't carry the silence of fear. It sang, a triumphant anthem of unyielding spirits. Dawn bloomed over the arid land, transforming the barren expanse into a vibrant scene under the hands of Terran Blithe and Soren Hale. Pale golden light stretched across the newly built wooden fence, gilding the dew-damp sand like a fresh coat over old dust. The morning breeze carried the scent of dry sage and the lingering warmth of last night's campfire, a reminder that Red Haven was no longer a mere stopover, but a home of hope. Soren gently stroked a horse's mane, his bony yet tender hands like the first rain of the season, while Terran busily set up a blackboard under the awning, white chalk poised for the day's first lesson. Red Haven, once a desolate patch of earth, now boasted neat horse stables and wooden crates of tools. Children from all corners arrived, their eyes sparkling like gems against the sandy backdrop, striding into the yard with oversized cowboy hats, clutching reins as if awaiting a birthday feast. Terran smiled as they lined up. She raised the board, sketching diagrams of how 4 people could build a smokeless fire, bandage a dry wound, or locate groundwater. Each chalk stroke was a bridge from fear to confidence, from tempest to tranquility. Across the yard, Soren guided a shy child onto a leather saddle, his gentle eyes a shield of comfort. The soft clop of hooves and innocent laughter echoed through the vast space, as if erasing the scars of the past. He taught them to balance, to listen to the horse's breathing to gauge its mood. Sweat beaded on his brow, a testament to his pledge. Here, every scar would heal through patience. As the sun crested the hill, the sky shifted from gold to blazing orange, and Terran and Soren sat side by side on a rock by the camp's entrance. They shared a freshly baked slice of bread, the butter melting on their tongues, blending two once adrift souls. Terran picked up a pebble, carving "Never Run from Love" onto it before handing it to Soren, her eyes shimmering like morning dew. He took it, a faint smile tugging his lips, then drew a simple silver ring from his pocket, humble yet radiant, and offered it to her. "I ran from everything once," his voice warm as the dawn breeze, "but I couldn't run from you." Terran slid the ring onto her finger, her heart bursting in that moment. Desert sand clung to her toes, the wind played with her hair, and the world swayed to their shared breath. Behind them, Red Haven was no longer just a place of physical healing, but a symbol of love and resilience. The stable walls glowed in the sunset, the wooden gate creaking like a steadfast vow. The horses nodded at Soren's sharp whistle, and every child's face bloomed with a smile, as if singing for a new beginning. Terran leaned against his shoulder, listening to his heartbeat sync with the pulse of the land, knowing that while the horizon beyond was vast, Red Haven was the only place they truly belonged. After hearing the resilient and mysterious journey of Terran Blithe and Soren Hale, I've come to understand the power of hope and humanity amid the harsh desert. Thank you for joining Millionaire and Heart Stories, where every tale touches the heart. See you in the next episode.